All right. Merry Christmas, maybe. We'll see. So Wicked came out around Thanksgiving to critical acclaim and big bucks at the box office, and I have thoughts. I was gonna make a tier list, but it ended up being a rant. So just wait for the hook on this one. It's gonna be a doozy. We'll see how this one works out. Wicked stars Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande, along with some other folks. It's a dark fantasy reimagining prequel to The Wizard of Oz. It started out as a book, I just found out, that was then made into a hugely successful musical that I actually saw in theaters once upon a time. And now after decades on Broadway, it's on the big screen in the first of what I think is a 2-part series. Forgive me if I got that incorrect. It may be 3 parts. I'm not sure. Either way, it's known for being kind of this feminist-centered retelling of the story from the perspective of the Wicked Witch of the West, aka Alphaba, played by Cynthia Erivo, and it conceptualizes this, at least in its first part, as Alphaba being this put-upon outcast turned quasi-revolutionary as she maybe rallies against injustice in the form of a wizard who we know from the original story is a phony.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
There's commentary on identity, metaphors on oppression that could fit really any number of groups suffering from oppression in this country. But more than anything, it's just really, really good. Erivo, I'm told, is somewhat of a problematic figure in Black and gay circles at the same time. And Grande has her own overly tanned history, but both were amazing. I think Grande is probably going to reemerge as an actress after this because she was really good and yada, yada, yada. Let's overanalyze some shit, nigga!
Hi, my name is Princess Weeks. I do a YouTube channel where I talk about the intersections of race and gender in pop culture. And FD realized that he might be a little out of his depth when it comes to the topic of Wicked. And as someone who came of age during the big Wicked craze, made a lot of AMVs for it, and just generally loves witchy stuff and loved this movie, I felt like I'd just come in to give him a little bit of crossover help with his understanding of the wild times of the Wicked Witch of the West. So, toss.
I hope that's funny and not just unhinged. So follow me for a second. In the movie, Cynthia Erivo's character Alphaba is green. And in their world, there's really no sense of racism. There are Black and brown and Asian characters all through the movie, and nobody is treated any differently based on the color of their skin, except for Cynthia Erivo's character, who is green, because people could be Black and brown and white or whatever, but they can't be green. So what this ends up doing, especially with Erivo playing Alphaba's character, is pull out this imagery and these themes and these feelings of how Black women are treated when they enter non-Black, predominantly white spaces, and how they have to engage with white women as peers and, God forbid, allies, aka her relationship with Glinda. We'll come back to this. And I want it to be clear, we are meant to understand Alphaba as a racial minority, specifically a Black woman. Aside from the fact that she's played by Erivo, who cannot be mistaken as anything else but a Black woman, she also is very Black-coded. Erivo ensured that her character would be Black-coded because she gave her micro braids and a little baby hair at the top, and she made sure that her fingernails were the type of fingernails that you will see as signifiers of Black women. The younger version of the character is played by a Black child with kinky hair. And then there's also just a lot of nuances to Cynthia Erivo's performance and how she responds to microaggressions and derision in the very, very white space that she's in, specifically from the very, very white femininity of Ariana Grande's character, Glinda. A lot of this is if you know type energy, but a lot of it isn't. It's just pretty obvious. And I think a lot of people, not everyone, but I think a lot of people that love this story are probably seeing it and like engaging with it very differently, with Alphaba being played by a Black woman, because it turns all of that subtext about her being an outsider up to 11 and really pulls out those themes more than they probably have been done in the book or the stage play. I saw the stage play, I kind of could see that, but now seeing Alphaba as a Black woman, I literally cannot imagine that the stage play ever starred a non-Black woman as Alphaba.
One of the things I found really interesting when the casting for Wicked was announced is that you have Cynthia Erivo, who is this very dark-skinned Black woman, shaved head, septum ring, and then cast as her sister Nessa Rose is Marissa Bode, another beautiful actress. I believe both of them are queer, so that's awesome. But Marissa is a much lighter-skinned woman. Her hair is a much looser texture in comparison to, we see Alphaba wearing braids, and Cynthia Erivo herself has always had a bald head in most of her mainstream career. So you have this situation where they are both playing characters who are biracial, but you have a sense of like, not only does the greenness imply a sense of colorism in itself, because if you took the green off, Cynthia would still be darker skinned, but you have the white living parent favoring this lighter skinned sibling, the one who has the right kind of skin tone closer to him. So even if we just take it at that level, you have the idea of colorism playing in the preference of the father and how he views these two young women, because at the end of the day, Cynthia and therefore Alphaba will always be dark-skinned versus Nessa, who is lighter-skinned.
And I know that Alphaba was originally played by Idina Menzel, aka Adele Dazeem.
Please welcome the wickedly talented one and only Adele Dazeem.
Menzel is Jewish, and there is some history behind, Jewish women being depicted as witches, and like still an ethnic coding and outsider coding, a racial othering that is involved there. But it just hit different with a black woman. It is what it is. Because Erivo's overtly black femininity works within the movie in the way that she feels the need to manage perception, to not speak up for herself, to not get angry when she really deserves to be angry. The fantasies she holds to be embodied in a way that would be more approved by the world. There's a whole lot there. I'm sure some black film creators are going to do more justice to it, but I really cannot understand how this can work again without a black woman as a lead. Like, I imagine that going forward, it's going to be like what they did with Nick Cage. Luke Cage? No. Nick Fury. It's like what they did. It's like what Marvel did with Nick Fury. People don't know that Nick Fury in the Marvel movies was never a black man until like a moment before the Marvel movies became a thing. And Samuel Jackson just worked so well as this character that from that point on, he's always been a black character in the comics. Like, I think that's what's going to happen here. Also, just to keep it real, I'm looking forward to more black goth girls in public. Just, no untoward reasons for that. I'm just saying, more black women dressed as witches. This is a good thing. This is a good thing. I will take no negative responses to that belief.
We have in the more modern tradition a lot of neo-pagan concepts that have created things like covens and the triple goddess and things that, your typical Wiccan, baby Wiccan will find after reading The Craft. And that is its own sphere. But what we don't often discuss is the way in which ethnic stereotyping comes into play with the witch as an archetype. And we've been talking about this more with Cynthia Erivo being Alphaba, and how very clearly issues of race and ethnicity come into play and are played with in this show. I mean, the animals are going through what would essentially be considered a pogrom. And when it comes to Jewish stereotypes centering around witches, that is a big thing that we're not often taught, and therefore it's hard to recognize. In America, when we talk about witch hunts, we're either talking about, the modern feminist witch hunts, or we talk about the Salem witch trials, which are a very small microcosm of what the witch trials were in Europe. In Europe, they were, I would go to say, like, slaughters. Like, they estimate that anywhere between 40,000 and 100,000 people across 3 centuries of witch hunting were killed, and between 75 to 85% of those people were women. And among those were marginalized women in those communities, especially Jewish women and Jewish people. And there are small things that come in because Christianity is so mixed in with this, that a lot of the anti-Semitism is just things that are repackaged from Christianity. You have we think about the hats that witches wear. In like the 1200s, Jewish people were required to wear these sort of like cone-shaped hats to make them visible targets. And those would become a prototype of what would be the witch's hat. There are also the way that they appropriate things like the Sabbath in order to have a witch's Sabbath, the ideas of Jewish people having horns, and therefore that be associated with art with the devil, and then having witches walking with the devil. It's all of these smaller things that are both already built in anti-Semitism, and then on top of it, the exclusionary process and history of Jewish people. I think that because Jewish people in America occupy a complex ethnic and racial space, that unless you're aware of those things, it's very easy to just kind of see it as like, oh, it's just all a metaphor for broader things. And I think that if you're familiar with Judaism, you could recognize that in the animals. I think sometimes that gets obfuscated by Alphaba's greenness, because that giving her a color, giving her an other color, will then make you think of Black, Asian, other visible minorities.
So all of this brings us back to Glinda, again, played by Ariana Grande. And Glinda is the embodiment of white femininity in this movie. And some may be driven to say that this has nothing to do with race, but really her white femininity in general, has everything to do with race, especially in America, because our concepts of gender, of masculinity and femininity were built with white people specifically in mind. There's a reason they dyed Ariana Grande's hair blonde and played down her minutely Italian features so that she would fit the low-key Aryan image of femininity that Western culture holds at the top of the food chain. But it's not just aesthetic in the way that she carries herself. The whole hair flipping thing, all the pink, the high-pitched voice, the way she sings and moves. But most interestingly is the way that the movie purposefully or maybe accidentally also presents the deep flaws of white femininity as it pertains to being an ally or engaging in actual feminism. Glinda has a sense of entitlement to things she hasn't earned. Glinda is very jealous over people she sees as lesser than her, even when they're allegedly fighting for the same things. Glinda has an extremely performative nature behind her righteousness and justice, and at the end, her resignation to not risk her privilege and abide by the status quo, instead of being really an ally to Alphaba and oppressed people. It's right on the nose there. It's completely, like, again, I'm sure some people missed it. I'm sure there's some people this is a reach. Those people are stupid. Those people are stupid. I'm sorry. The only unrealistic thing to me about Ariana Grande's performance is how she lets on that there's conflicts in her decisions around the white femininity. In certain scenes at the beginning and the end of the movie where Glinda knows she is betraying her friendship and allyship to Alphaba, we can really see that conflict in her eyes. Her performance shows a sense of shame in the way she's behaving and participating in the oppression of others to save her own skin, but at the end of the day, she does still do it. It's a great performance, but it's unrealistic because historically, we never really see that part. Like, historically, when allies fail to hold up the end of the bargain, they act like it's your fault. There's never a sense of regret or shame in that activity. It's like, no, this is how it should happen, and we really mean this shit, and they don't see anything wrong with it. It is what it is. When watching this movie, especially at the time, only a few weeks after the election, there is this inclination to see the film through the results of the presidential election, where of course Kamala Harris lost to Donald Trump. And in the exit polls, it came out as always that white women were more in support of Trump than they were of Kamala, which isn't new because white women have historically voted more for Republicans than Democrats, because most white people vote for Republicans because most white people are racist. I'm not going to mince words with y'all tonight. It is what it is. And so when you have this juxtaposition between Glinda's faux and weak allyship and Alphaba losing everything to be a revolutionary, it elicits certain images of the 92% of black women that voted for Kamala Harris and the Democrats, and the, I think, 47% of white women that did, and the big gap that we see there. I even made a meme on Blue Sky where I put percentages of who voted for who on the various female characters. Black women with 92% for Alphaba. Madame Morrible, played by Michelle Yeoh, represents Asian women with over 60%. And of course, Glinda literally bringing up the rear here with 48%, which I'm told is actually too high. But that was a bait and switch, because that's not how I actually interpret the politics of this film. And I don't think you should either, because it's not hitting the most accurate mark here. But let's get back to the story. A little bit of spoilers, but deal with it. The core social issue in Ozland is the treatment of their animal citizens. In Oz, somehow animals are a specific class of people. They're not humans. They're still animals, bears, horses, goats, etc. But they're treated with the same rights and liberties as people, as humans. And they can talk and be educated. And it's hinted that they are a foundational part of the society. However, it's understood that they are also facing overt state repression. They are being locked in cages, deposed from their jobs, all kinds of obvious shit that is emblematic of how the state represses different groups. You could see them as symbolic of Jewish people during the Holocaust, which is probably their original intent, or undocumented immigrants in America right now, or maybe even a group being systemically and ethnically cleansed from a region that is really their homeland right now, with far more violent tactics, in a country with a black, white, and red-green flag that I'm avoiding saying out loud because YouTube is fucking with your boy right now. But if you know, you know, and God, I hope you know. Regardless of which oppressed group you want to attribute them to, the point is that they are being oppressed by the state, by the system, and that the status quo depends on their continued oppression. And Alphaba, this black-coded woman with immense power, decides to use that power to fight for justice for these people, even as it costs her access to everything she wanted. She becomes a revolutionary, it seems, and is intent on stopping the oppressive state from doing what they want to do. And this scene is really beautiful and awe-inspiring. I saw the film a second time with my sons, and I really love that they got to witness this black woman character be a hero, be a revolutionary as little boys. I think that's really important for them to see. The thing though, is that what we get from Alphaba in this film, in this moment, is not really what that 92% represents as far as I can tell. If we were to superimpose the current politicians du jour over these various characters, I think some people would want to cast Alphaba as Kamala Harris, and that's just not reality. In fact, in every way outside of race, Kamala Harris will be Glinda. We don't really have an Alphaba in our current political reality. Alphaba is a revolutionary. That's the spirit of black folks that have been resisting this system wholeheartedly for years, that has been co-opted by capitalism and by the Democratic Party. And we are led to think Kamala is Alphaba, but she's really not. She's Glinda at best. Oz is Joe Biden. Madame Morrible is Hillary Clinton or something. That's the reality of the situation. And this sucks because in a perfect world, I know some of you are thinking this because I get this in the comments. I wish I found a character evil enough to represent Trump in this movie, but it doesn't exist. And we have to deal with what we actually have here. The first line of the song that connects with this scene is a direct connection between the real radical and revolutionary belief that Alphaba has versus the compromise that Glinda represents. And Glinda starts out by saying a phrase that is extremely familiar in the politics of compromise. When she says, I hope you're happy that you hurt your cause forever. I hope you think you're clever, implying that Alphaba's cause of saving these animals from ethnic cleansing is somehow hurt by her not agreeing to work under the people responsible for it. And Alphaba returns and kind of reads her for filth when she says, I hope you're happy that you'll grovel in submission to feed your own ambition. Which is I know y'all gonna be mad at me. That is literally what Kamala Harris has been the last 4 years and some change. Unlike Kamala or, black women voters in general for Democrats, Alphaba has significant extreme power. She has all the real power because she's the only one that can do magic. She has the book, yada, yada, yada. The only power that Oz and his faction have is the power of propaganda and trickery, which is actually really useful. I'm told I'll find that out for real in the second installment of the movie. What makes it hard though is that I get how and why the portrayal of Alphaba and her internal conflict would connect with a lot of black women up until that point, because the reason why so many black women took the return of Trump so hard is because that they're going to be one of the first groups negatively affected by what a Trump president represents. And so much like Alphaba in the film, there is this internal desire to engage with a position of power and have that position of power pull you away from blackness, or in her situation, greenness. Alphaba spends a lot of time fantasizing about what it would feel like to not be green. And I know this is something we're not supposed to talk about, but the reality is anti-blackness is something that all of us deal with. And specifically for black women, when you look at the way they're depicted and the way they're perceived in society, there is a strong pull to say you can stop being seen as just a black woman if you do this set of things here. If you become more feminine, if you get the right man, maybe a white man, which is also alluded to in this story. I didn't touch on this in the Swirl Economics video, but when I was doing research for that, I found Swirl Romance Stories YouTube, which is I almost don't Google that. Because it's not so much harmful as it is really cringe and kind of pathetic, to be honest with you, because it's a response to society treating black women a certain way, is the creation of these fantasy spaces that are inherently anti-black, but in a way that you don't notice, because all of those stories hinge upon this benevolent fantasy white male figure falling in love with. It's basically shoujo anime, but for black girls, still starring white men. I'm gonna princess, save me, princess. Please?
What's always been kind of interesting about Fierro is that he is very boring. I think like Dancing Through Life is one of my favorite songs in Wicked, but he's ultimately very boring. And one of the interesting changes that was made from the book to the show due to just the amount of time it would take to have two characters who had to have a completely different skin tone. But in the book, Fierro is blue. And so like he himself is also sort of like a man of color. I believe his coding is more Southeast Asian in the book as well. So in the narrative itself, there was already this element of these two, like an interracial relationship between two different colored people getting together. And that was always really interesting. And so Fierro just becomes sort of like a weird ally in when he's just kind of like a regular white guy. I will, however, shout out that at one point when Adina Menzel was still Alphaba, her then husband Taye Diggs performed as Fierro, and that was great. It was really good. It's probably my favorite version of that relationship because they had such really good, organic chemistry that definitely helps in Act 2. But I think Fierro himself is sort of like a strange character. He means well and he kind of gets caught up in things. And I think in a lot of ways, he represents sort of this like passive privilege caught between, these two much more interesting female characters. I think Jonathan Bailey is thankfully very hot and cool enough to sort of make that cool to watch. But again, I think it depends on how they stick the landing because they've already removed Fierro's marginality in a certain way that I think builds a more organic connection with Alphaba versus, he's just kind of like a decent dude. So I would just hope that they understand watching like a black woman and a white woman fight over like a white man, even one such as Jonathan Bailey, is just kind of like, we don't need it. Let's add, if we're going to do this story, let's add some more depth to it. Let's add some more thought into how Fierro sees himself more aligned with Alphaba than Glinda, because we don't really get a proper explanation for that. And I think it would behoove the narrative to really make that character more than what he is.
Yeah, so all these ideas are why this video exists, and they're in conflict with each other because on some levels it makes so much sense. On some levels it conflicts with the reality of the politics that we're dealing with right now. On some levels, I completely understand why so many people, specifically black women, have the response to the election that they had, or even have the response to want to just get along to go along and go along with the status quo if it means that they get to not be in the crosshairs for this moment at least. It all makes sense. There's a whole conversation around like making sure to not put too much faith in Hollywood, making truly subversive and revolutionary content, because they don't. It's always close, but they always got a hook for you. But this is light work.
As someone who really doubted Wicked coming into it, I was so surprised by it doing so well and managing to let all these elements of it breathe, because I sometimes would fear that the shallowness was sort of the appeal, that it didn't really believe in the political underbelly. And I think if you've read the books, which are so much more political, but it's also, the book itself is also kind of a mess, that it's easy to chop away so much of it and it kind of leaves it kind of feeling irrelevant. And by allowing this first part to really sit and digest that storyline, by having Dr. Dilliman not just be like a man in a costume and now a CGI animal, something with, life in it, for lack of a better word, you really understand. And your little flourishes that they do, like the scene where Madame Morrible and Alphaba's magic kind of lead to the thing crashing against the picture of the wizard, and when it falls down you see the picture of the animals behind it. Like, that kind of visual storytelling is just so incredible. And my big hope, as someone who really doesn't like Act 2 of Wicked, is that they will use all of that extra time and all of those, cinematic ability to flesh out things to do that, because I think that it's a musical that could really benefit from the I'm remiss to even call it subtext, because I feel like it is the text itself, but I think it'll be such a good way to let everyone know that this was always a part of the show. It just may not have always been a part of the show that people were addressing at the very beginning. And a part of me will also hope that they'll let it be super queer. But a girl can dream.
I want to thank Princess Weeks for helping add useful context to this video, and I want you to know that not only can you find her on YouTube at Princess Weeks, but you can also find her on our streaming service Nebula, where she and I make a lot of pop culture oriented content about some of our favorite shows and cultural happenings, including videos that aren't on YouTube, such as both of our contributions to the Working Title series, where many of your favorite essayists make shorter videos analyzing sequences from some of our favorite shows. So not only do you have my video on the Boondocks and Princess Weeks video on Charmed, we also have Jacob Geller talking about Community, Polyphonic, analyzing Game of Thrones, H. Bombergon, True Detective, etc. For years, this is what made Nebula great. We are an independent streaming service created by YouTubers like myself, where we can have a place for creators to work the way that we want to work and make the type of content we want to make without the persistent pressures that YouTube puts on us. YouTube, like most social media platforms, is guided by AI and machine learning algorithms, which attempt to hack your brain for the purpose of taking the control of your viewing out of your hands. And to be fair, it does work, but it also has a ton of unintended consequences, such as making it risky to talk about certain topics or be more creative than the algorithm and the machines would want you to be. And alleviating all of this is just one element of Nebula. But if you've been around for a while, then you know that Nebula is changing. It's going from just a place for all your favorite YouTubers to post their content ad-free, but it's now evolving into an outright independent film studio. In the last year or so, Nebula has made some tweaks to focus on giving its roster of over 200 talented creators the opportunity to think beyond YouTube videos. And in that time, we produced things like Wendover's series on science/history works, or travel content and reality shows like The Getaway. We even have original films like Philosophy Tube's short Dracula's Ex-Girlfriend, and that's just our first wave as we really get things started. But we need your support to keep up the momentum. You can help us continue to be the most exciting space for independent content creators and get access to exclusive and ad-free content by signing up using my promo code FDSignifier or by clicking the link in the description. We rely on you all as the consumer to keep this ball rolling, as we are completely independent. We are not owned by YouTube or Google or any other big tech company. It's just us as the creators and you guys as the viewers. So help us keep things moving by joining us today, and use my link to get 40% off, just $30 a year or $2.50 a month. Or if you're feeling really generous, you can even get a lifetime subscription for a one-time payment of $300, which is a bigger payment up front, but a really good deal in the long run and a huge help for my channel. So click the link below to go to nebula.tv/Signified B-Sides. Thank you so much for watching the video all the way through. Thank you to Princess Weeks for helping me out. Please check out her channel and her Patreon, as well as my other channels and my Patreon. I'm FD Signifier, and this has been Lightwork.